Hey, what's up, everybody? Chris here. And 15 years after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, we finally have a fifth Indiana Jones movie. I never thought this would happen. I never thought I'd be sitting here recording a review for this film, but it finally did make it to the big screen. Just saw it with my wife. Went to a 6:40 showing here in the Charlotte area. Just finished, just got home. So I wanted to give you my fresh out of the theater thoughts about this. Be as transparent as I can be about my takeaways, but also make this spoiler free. So I know a lot of people have not obviously had a chance to see this yet. So if you want to get my opinion on it without, being spoiled plot wise, I'm going to do that. Try to keep this relatively brief. I think I'm going to do a spoiler review a little bit later down the road. I'm going to take my son to see it maybe next week sometime. This is one that I knew I was going to see twice in the theaters no matter what, just because it's the final Indiana Jones movie, and it's my favorite, one of my favorite IPs of all time, franchises of all time. You've heard me say this before if you followed the channel for any extended period, but Raiders of the Lost Ark is bar none, my favorite film of all time, so of course I was excited about this. So anyway, let's jump right into it. Hey, if you're enjoying the content, please do me a favor. Please be sure to click the like button. Please be sure to subscribe, and as always, I very much appreciate your viewership. So, right out of the gate, again, without getting into spoilers, I would say that I like this movie, but I don't love it. I like it. I think it's a fine Indiana Jones movie. I definitely do not think it's the worst in the series, but it is definitely not the best in the series. Like, I've seen reviews kind of all over the place. Some people say this is a travesty, it never should have been made, it's whatever, terrible. That is absolutely not true. I've seen a couple here and there that say, oh, this is the best in the series. Not many are saying that, and that's definitely also not true. So, in terms of rankings, this is sort of a tough one for me because, it's kind of like Star Wars in that you compare these films to one another and they kind of exist in that bubble a little bit. So, my favorite one still is Raiders of the Lost Ark, obviously. My second favorite one is Last Crusade. After that, it gets to be a toss-up. A lot of people, think it's blasphemy to say that Temple of Doom is not, among the best of the series. I actually have found Crystal Skull to be way more rewatchable over the years than Temple of Doom. I think that Dial of Destiny is better than Crystal Skull, for sure. I think in a lot of ways it's better than Temple of Doom, but I'm going to have to marinate on that one a little bit longer to kind of see where I land with it. So let me just talk about the things that I really like with this film. The opening sequence is awesome, right? I mean, you've probably seen some other critics talk about this a little bit, but it feels like sort of a classic, Indiana Jones situation where it's set in Nazi Germany. He's trying to recover something on a Nazi loot train. I mean, that's sort of the premise without getting into too many spoilers with it, but the setup and the execution of it is great. I will say, though, that I think the de-aging that's been sort of touted as being sort of the best we've seen in a movie here is really hit and miss. Like, there are some scenes where it looks really super convincing, and I think really when he's got his kind of classic Indiana Jones garb on with the hat and the jacket and everything, it looks really, really good. There are some other scenes where he's wearing a different guise, I guess I would say, where to me it just was kind of not all that great. And there are a couple of scenes where there are close-ups on his face with like a flashlight on his face where it's a little like not particularly convincing. There's one shot where he's running on top of a train that looks really bad, like just straight up, you gotta say it just looks kind of like Play-Doh-ish Spider-Man sort of thing. But for the most part, I would agree that generally, from a de-aging point of view, this is the best that I've seen in a movie so far. I'm thinking about things like Rogue One and some other films where this has been used kind of extensively. This is the most convincing I've seen it, but it's still not 100% great all the time. It kind of takes you out of it from moment to moment. But the first, sequence in the movie is really well done. There's one thing I was a little disappointed about with the very start of the movie, and I'll talk about that in my spoiler review. But overall, the opening's great. The story here, I do think, is one of the better ones out of all of the movies in the franchise. And it's really kind of focused on Indiana Jones as sort of an aging archaeologist whose life is not where he probably expected it to be at this point, or at that point, I should say, in 1969, I believe this is set. And just all the things that he has to grapple with. I think this is the most human that we've ever seen from Indiana Jones as a character, and I appreciate that. I think that James Mangold was trying to do that effectively, and he does it well. I think Harrison Ford, does a great job, of course, bringing the character back to life after all these years. The supporting cast is great. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I have no issues with her. I thought she was a great character in this. Helena, awesome. The interplay between both of them works super well. No issues there with me. I've seen some people complaining about that as if she were trying to take over the role of Indiana Jones, but that's not what this is. She's a great character. And what I especially like, again, without getting into spoilers, is they don't just completely write off Crystal Skull because, there's a lot of vitriol out there for that film. They do dive into some of the aspects of that a little bit and just sort of the family situations that have happened since then, again, to give that humanity to Indiana Jones. I think the archaeology in this is awesome. And what I'm telling you here is not anything that you can't see in a trailer. You know, a lot of stuff related to ancient Greece, Archimedes, all of that kind of stuff. Like, I love all of that. This is the kind of thing that these movies I've always loved about these movies, right? Even as a kid, I've loved sort of the archaeology, the pseudoscience behind them, and you get a lot of that here. You get Harrison Ford as Indy doing his thing, kind of cracking codes, solving puzzles alongside Helena. All that's awesome. I think, too, that Mangold does a good job for the most part. I mentioned that kind of early train sequence a little bit and some of the stuff there that was a little bit wonky with the CGI, but I think he tries to keep things, you know, relatively grounded where it's not kind of that Spider-Man effect where Harrison Ford is just going all over the place. They sort of acknowledge the fact that, I guess, the character Indiana Jones is 70, Harrison Ford himself is 80, but he can't do a lot of what he used to do, and that's sort of, you know, played off for humor a little bit, but not in a disrespectful or stupid way or kind of cringy way. It, like, works well in how they wove it into the plot. There's been a lot of commentary about the third act, and again, I'm not going to spoil it, and you either, I think, are going to be full in on it, or you're going to be like, what the hell is going on? So, I will tell you, my wife really loved most of the movie. She did not love the way the third act played out. I was all in on it because, to me, without spoiling anything, it's kind of a culmination of what you see from Indiana Jones as a character and what his life pursuits have been. You know, it's the way that they do it and don't shy away from it. I really appreciate it because it was one of those things to me that's like, okay, if you're going to do this, like, go big or go home. And they did that, and it was awesome. So all of those are things that I love. I think that the action choreography is pretty good, but that's going to lead me into some of the stuff that I'm not as big of a fan of. So my biggest fear going into this movie is that, you know, the first 4 films have a very trademark style with Steven Spielberg. Like, he's just got a very kind of meticulously crafted way of approaching action, moving the camera, framing shots, all that. And I was worried that that was going to be missing here to the point of detracting greatly from the film. It is missing here, and I will say that's something that I didn't really love. I mean, Mangold is a great director, no doubt, but in some ways, the directing feels a little bit bland. Like, there's no other way to say it. At times, it feels a little bit bland. The action scenes mostly are set up well and feel, again, relatively grounded in reality, which I really appreciate, minus the craziness of the third act. So, in that regard, that's a good thing. But beyond that, it is kind of missing that Spielbergian feel to it. I did feel that that was something that was missing. So, it didn't, you know, cripple the film or hurt it, you know, substantially, but it just... It's funny because I saw a lot of reviews without reading spoilers before I saw the movie saying, "Oh, it feels like an old school Indiana Jones movie." In a lot of ways, it does feel like that, but in a lot of ways, it feels like a totally different thing to me. Like, it doesn't feel like the first 4 movies. This is, in my mind, kind of a different film in that it tries to shake up some of the conventions of Indiana Jones while also working in some stuff that I think Mangold is aware that fans would want to see in there. So I like that they weren't scared to do something different, especially plot-wise and characterization-wise and all that. But the actual directing itself, you know, to me wasn't the best in the world. And it's a little bit weird because I love Mangold's other films like Logan, Ford v Ferrari. Like, those are awesome movies with great action. Again, the action here is good, but because it doesn't feel like Spielberg is directing it, that was just something that I wasn't a huge fan of personally. Again, plot-wise, there are some things early in the movie that I can see people not really loving. I think the movie does take a little while to get going. And the place that we find Indy at, like, I wouldn't say that it's controversial or anything like that, or that it's going to generate a ton of controversy, but in some ways it might. Like, again, without getting too spoilery. And I think that's really kind of where my criticism tends to sort of track toward, is this idea that, you know, there are just stretches of the movie that, even though technically they're fine, the action's fine, you know, it doesn't have the spark that we saw in films like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Last Crusade. And I get that it's totally unfair to expect that this is going to be a movie on those tiers, because it's not. But it's one of those things, too, that I think if I marinate on a little bit and after seeing it a second time, I'll just kind of see what my response is. My fresh out of the theater take, though, is having that Spielbergian way of directing kind of tattooed in my brain for so many years, seeing something that's different than that, it's a little bit jarring, you know, kind of getting used to it. As the movie moves forward, you know, things continue to develop plot-wise, things are good. And I will say, you know, I'm kind of shifting all over the place here, and that's just what I tend to do when I'm doing my fresh out of the theater takes. But Mads Mikkelsen is one of the best indie villains of all of them, honestly. Like, I mean, I think of Belloc maybe being as top tier. I think the character of, I think it's Voller, I can't remember exactly what the name is, I'll have to double check, and I'll put a little correction here. He's great. To me, he's better than the villain that we have in Temple of Doom. I think he's better, obviously, than Cate Blanchett's villain in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, even though I do still appreciate a lot about that movie. And probably, honestly, even better than Donovan in Last Crusade. Like, I just think his motivations are interesting, and it's kind of a nice blending of what we expect from kind of a classic Indiana Jones movie, which is him punching Nazis, and you get plenty of that here. But also, this idea that how do you sort of reckon with history? Like, what does that mean for this character versus this character, and all of that kind of stuff. So I appreciated that piece of it as well. So again, in summary, I would say that it's a good Indiana Jones entry, but it's not great. That's kind of where I land with it. I would say that it's probably my third or fourth favorite. I mentioned that earlier. It's kind of hard for me once I get past Raiders and Last Crusade to figure out where I would fit this, but those are just kind of my thoughts. Oh, one other thing that I do need to talk about, John Williams' score. Totally good. Totally fine. I wouldn't say that there's any standout orchestral music here. Like, of course, they use the Indiana Jones theme frequently, and it works well, but it totally complements the film in a way that's great. I would say none of it stands out in the way that it does with Last Crusade or Raiders, though. Just my 2 cents on it, but it's totally fine. So anyway, overall, solid Indiana Jones finale, and I do think that the send-off that they finally give him at the very end is totally fitting and fine, and I would say it feels a little bit rushed, potentially, the very, very end, even though the movie's like 2 hours and 34 minutes, or whatever it ends up being, but I still appreciated kind of where they ended up with him. And, I wouldn't say it's overly emotional, but it's got a certain degree of poignancy. The writing in the very last scene, which I won't spoil here, is just chef's kiss. Like, very, very good writing, a good way to kind of conclude things. So overall, I'm happy that this is the conclusion that Indiana Jones has. So anyway, if you've seen the movie, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And as always, thanks so much for watching.